when we put it
Gotcha.
out. So we're probably at that point. All right. So welcome everyone to Freely Nourished, the podcast that empowers you to break the cycle of dieting by teaching you to nourish your bodies well. And today I have with me a very special guest. I have with me my very own intern, Brittney Stokely. Brittney and I have known each other for a couple of years now, and I am so excited. She is on the very tail end of her internship to become a dietitian. And we are going to talk much more about what that means, what it looks like, and what Brittney's experience has been. But Brittney, I am so excited that you're here, that you have volunteered right away, like week one, to get on camera and let me post it on the internet. And I'm like, yes, I was hoping you would want to do it. And then it was like one of the first things out of your mouth at one of our meetings. So I'm so excited to have you here. Tell us, I know we've got some questions and things to dig into, but kind of just tell us a little bit about you. I know you, but the rest of my listeners don't know you. So tell me a little bit about you, where you're from, kind of what got you into dietetics, all that.
Yeah, so my name is Brittney. I will be 30 later on this year. I'm married with two small children, a 6-year-old girl and a almost 2-year-old little boy. I live here in Lexington, and yeah, I'm a non-traditional, I guess, a student. This is like a second career path for me, and yeah, just excited to be here.
Tell me, I'm so excited that you're here. So tell me a little bit just kind of about you. This is your second career choice. So tell me kind of a little bit about what was kind of your first career and what led you just a little bit into the realm of dietetics. What made you want to be a dietitian?
So my first degree is in human nutrition, and I got that back in 2016. So I've always had an interest in nutrition. My original thought process when I went to school originally was to go to medical school afterwards, and I quickly realized that was not going to be the path for me. So I, at that point, should have probably changed my degree to dietetics, but hindsight is 2020. So I did graduate that degree, human nutrition, in 2016, and went to start working for a local nonprofit, which I had been volunteering for previous to starting working there. So it was just a really easy transition into that. And I kept getting promoted and things were going really well there. So I had no motivation to leave. And I did enjoy the work. I was helping people, not anything related to nutrition, but it was just a job that made you feel good in your soul. So I really enjoyed it. Then the pandemic hit in 2020 and we switched to working from home, and I had a lot of time to think and reflect. And I thought, what do I want to be doing 5 years from now? And that was like a question I just kind of kept asking myself, what do I want to be doing 5 years from now? And that's when I kind of thought back to like nutrition. Like I really enjoyed it. I still was very much interested in it. And I thought if I wanted to make that a career, I needed to go back to school. So that's what I did. And it kind of led me to getting here at this point.
Yeah. Yes. And I am so glad that you're here. As we were talking a little bit off air of kind of how quickly that internship does go. it's been what, 8 months now, and you are kind of just like, whoa, where did that time go? Which is wild. Yeah. So, so just kind of tell everyone who may not be familiar, since you're like in the thick of it, right? I realize you had a little bit of a non-traditional path, but kind of what all does it take to become a dietitian? Because this is something that I preach to people, but like you're in the thick of it. So I want them to hear from your voice. What does it take? What all is involved?
Yeah. So first, you do have to get a degree in dietetics. Like that's important. That's a 4-year degree from an accredited university. Once you graduate from that, you then have to go on to an internship program. And these can be anywhere from 6 months to maybe even a year, depending on the program you decide. And there you're getting supervised practice hours working in the fields of food service, community nutrition, clinical nutrition. And then my specific program also has a business and entrepreneurship rotation, which I'm doing with Erin. But typically that's not one of the elements that are involved in it. And essentially you're getting hands-on practice, working in the field, seeing a dietitian in action, and just kind of absorbing all of their knowledge. And then when you get finished with that and you complete all of your hours, you then have to sit for the exam, and you have to pass that in order to actually become a registered dietitian.
Yes. And I will add that after you are a registered dietitian, you have to do at least 15 hours a year of continuing education credits. Otherwise, you have to sit for the exam again. Nope. And nobody wants to do that. So make sure you get your CEUs.
Exactly.
Yes. And so, yeah. And I think that speaks to so much of kind of what we want to talk about today, because I feel like, it's a very, people don't realize how hard it is to really become a dietitian. They don't realize how much is involved, how expensive it is. A 4-year college degree is not cheap. There are scholarship options and things like that, but it's still expensive. And then there's your whole internship is not paid typically. So mine was not paid. Yours is not paid. In fact, we both are paying tuition for our internship hours. So you're actually paying to work 40 hours for free for 8 months, which, as a college kid doesn't sound as intimidating, but as an adult, like I was, and like you are, where you have, kids and bills and lots of things to do. It's really daunting. And then not, then still having to study and pass an exam before you really can get a job. But, some employers will hire you before you're certified, but still it's it's nerve-wracking.
Absolutely. Because I mean, put in all this time and energy from like being a student in school again to now doing this internship, and always you always have this thought in the back of your mind, like, what if like I don't pass the exam? Like, what if I can never actually work in this field? Like after all of this, like it's scary.
Yeah. Well, let's also not forget that it costs money to take the test too. Like it's, I think it was $200 when I took it. I don't know if it's the same.
It's still around. Yeah.
Which, like, okay, if that's like a one-time investment, but if you don't pass on the first time, and a lot of people don't, and I don't mean this to scare you, Brittney, calm down.
But no,
but that's another $200 you have to shell out to take the test again.
And you don't just abandon it over $200, because I mean, that's the ticket. That's the thing you need to be a legitimate registered dietitian. Like you have to pass was
right. And like you and I were saying, sometimes your employer will hire you. It used to be called RDE, like RD eligible, but now they've done away with that for some reason. But basically, like you've completed all the coursework, you've completed your internship, you just haven't taken your test, but they usually give you a timeline that like you have to pass the test by this date. Otherwise your employment is terminated, which is again, pressure, right? So this is something that it was on your question list, but I would love to hear your thoughts on it. So kind of given how much work you have recently put into this and how much anxiety it is giving you currently, how do you feel about people who don't have a dietetics degree, or at least, a degree in nutrition, even if they're not a certified dietitian, people who, say they're nutrition coaches or fitness coaches and things like that on social media, giving nutrition advice?
I don't love it. And it is crazy because it seems like people who maybe aren't necessarily qualified get a lot of attention very quickly. And I don't know if it's because they're saying things that people want to hear and identify with, even if they're not necessarily based in science and facts. I think a lot of times when you promote easy, quick fixes, right? Just eat this and you get all the answers. People love that. So they flock to it, but it just definitely makes it harder for people to actually access or get to the qualified individuals who've gone to school, who've studied for this, who are reading the, latest and greatest research and keeping up to date and all that. So yeah, I don't love it. I've spent a lot of time, money, resources into getting this degree. And I want people to realize that there is a difference.
A big one. It's beyond just what you learn. Like, it's not like, oh, I just like read more books than you. It's like, no, I have more experience than you. I've counseled more patients than you. I've read more literature than you. And anybody could read a literature article, but to really understand what it means in the context of the greater body of research, that's where really diving yourself in for, at least 4 years. Many people get a master's degree. So yeah, and then to have someone who has no certifications, who, just writing blogs about, I don't know, celery juice.
Or just what worked for them. And it's great. Like, if you found a for you, that's awesome. That doesn't mean it's going to work for the next person. I mean, that was your personal experience.
Yes. And kind of the thing you learn definitely in the classroom as a dietitian, but also in practice, is that every single human body that you interact with is going to be very different. And you have to treat them all very differently.
Yeah.
Otherwise they are not going to be successful. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Like people want that quick fix, and then it sounds so sexy and so easy. And then us with like your eat a moderate calorie deficit, like move your body in joyful
Yeah.
ways. It's only going to lose a pound a week, but who cares? That's great.
Right.
Like, it really doesn't sound super sexy standing next to it.
I mean, because a lot of times what people are promoting on social media are these fad diets that, yeah, you might lose weight initially, but will you keep it off? Probably not. And
Right.
also, I think also as we understand as being an RD, it's not always about weight loss. Like it's about general health. And I
Yep.
think people don't necessarily love that thought.
Yeah.
Our culture has so ingrained in us to put weight loss and health together, and they're not equal.
Yeah. Yes, I think you said that so beautifully, because yeah, we tend to think that like skinny is healthy and fat is not. And like
Yep.
it could not be further from the truth, really, because it's just not, because for so many reasons, right? But we just had a patient, a couple of minutes ago, that was just kind of talking about his blood lipids and things that he was worried about. And he's like, well, my weight's kind of in between where it was my last 2 times, so I think my blood work will be okay. And it's like, you cannot use your weight as a barometer for how your labs are going to come out. And you could kind of see in his face that was just like, he's like,
News. That was news.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, it's like, I don't really, like, I thought, because he had blood work done when he was heavier and it was not great, and then he had it done when he was thinner and it was better, and now he's somewhere in the middle, and he's kind of hoping his labs are somewhere in the middle. I'm like, I don't,
Right.
that's not going to pan out to be that way, because that's unfortunately just not how that works. I wish it did, but unfortunately it doesn't. So now that we've made becoming a dietitian sound fantastic, right? We've made it sound like, you put in all this time, all this money, like people abuse you as like free labor, and then like nobody listens to what you have to say at the end of the day anyway. So maybe unsurprisingly, enrollment rates in dietetics programs across the country are dropping drastically. And I don't know if that's something you are aware of, Brittney, but definitely compared to like other health professions like PAs, pharmacists, nurse practitioner, things like that, those enrollments are going up and up and up, and ours are going down and down and down. So kind of from your perspective as somebody who's like really just graduating in the field, kind of what do you think are maybe some of the contributing factors to that?
I think there's a lot of things. I think there is pay. I think dietitians are very much so underpaid, by all the other education that we have. We're just not getting compensated for that very well right now. And I also think just the barriers to getting into the field. So as we kind of already previously discussed, there's this unpaid internship that a lot of times you have to pay to do. So not only are you paying, like my particular program was about $10,000. That's a lot of money. So I'm paying to do that. I'm not receiving any compensation for the 40 hours plus a week that I'm putting in for 8 months at a time. That's a lot, and I feel very fortunate that I was in a position in life where, my husband works full time, so he was able to support me and my family. And I had some savings that were able to pay for this program, but not everyone has that. So, I mean, when you're looking at the path to become an RD and you hear, okay, you're going to have to go to school, and then you're going to have to do this other thing that you cannot get a student loan for, because even though you are technically still a student, you're not that type of student. So you're going to have to figure out how to pay for that. That doesn't sound appealing. And I know the process is changing a little bit now with the graduate model and, looping in your master's program. So I think that will definitely help. But I think that's a significant barrier. At least it was a significant barrier for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, to an extent, I think what Brittney's referring to when she says the master's model is now, as of, I think 2024 is when you will have to have a master's degree in order to sit for the registered dietitian exam. So right now you only have to have a bachelor's level degree, but you also have to have a minimum of 1,200 hours, which is usually 8 or so months of 40-hour weeks of unpaid experience. Supervised practice is what it's called. What they are changing it to is a model where you will do your internship and a master's degree at the same time. And I think there's benefits and drawbacks to that. I think one of the huge benefits, Brittney, is one of the things you said, is that you will now be able to qualify for student loans for that internship period, which I think will open some doors, because I think for me, I got all the way to like, I graduated with my like undergrad and like even part of my master's degree. And then like I was at my like last semester looking down the barrel of my internship. I'm like, wait, I have to pay for this out of pocket. Like nobody told me that. Like nobody informed me that I could not get a loan for that part of it. I was very much like you. I was fortunate. I had a partner. He was my husband now, but he was a boyfriend at the time. And, he was willing to, but that made me really uncomfortable to have to like ask somebody who I wasn't married to, be like, hey, can you like financially support me?
Right. Big ask.
Yeah, it was. And, we weren't married, and it wasn't like, it's still a big ask, I guess, as my husband now, but it's still just, it felt very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And not everybody has a partner like that is able and willing to do that. So, it was, again, I was very much like you, in a fortunate situation. And I had also kind of worked previously, so I had like some savings that I could contribute to it. But again, not everybody has that. Most people don't, coming out of college at 21, 22 years old.
Exactly.
Like that's, and like, maybe you have parents, but like, maybe you don't. Like, maybe it was a stretch for you to even get to college. Maybe you had to have a scholarship to go, and like, loans aren't an option for you.
Yeah.
So I think, it's, yeah. And the pay, the pay.
Yeah, because I'm currently obviously looking for, job opportunities, and like I'm just like, oh, okay. Like okay, like this is what it's be. And I guess I kind of knew that going into it, but like when you actually, at this point where I'm finally here, I'm actually looking for job opportunities and realizing, okay, hopefully the benefits are great.
Yeah. And in some places they are, and in some places, you and I live in the same city, so like I can give you the lowdown on that. But some places they're honestly not. Like they think, oh, you work in healthcare, you have great benefits, and like some places you do, other places not so much. And it's just like, ooh, so
clearly not getting into it for the money. But that's the other thing that I'm curious about, and maybe you have an opinion on this. So with switching to the graduate model, do you think that that's going to impact pay rates at some point?
I think that was part of the idea of why they wanted to do it, because the argument for it was that, one, you can qualify for student loans because you're still like a master's, like you're a graduate student at that point. The other idea is that by having a master's degree, you would theoretically qualify for a higher rate of pay. The downside is, though, of course, not everybody has the time, the money, or the ability to sit through a master's program, and that's going to exclude some people there too. As far as whether or not having a master's degree will actually lead to pay increases, I hate to say it, but frankly, no, I don't buy it. Because I think the argument was that because we are underpaid, so we are paid on average, dietitians make, at least in Kentucky, I can't speak for nationwide, but generally speaking, like $40,000 a year is a pretty good paying dietitian salary. Nationwide, I think it's something more like, 50 or so, just because like Kentucky's like a lower cost of living than a lot of places. But that said, I mean, that's not wild, right? Like, considering you have, most of us have 6-figure debt, $40,000 a year is like barely enough to get by in this economy, much less pay off those hefty student loans. And the argument was, well, the reason why, PAs and pharmacists and, physical therapists and kind of all those other like ancillary type healthcare professions are paid more is because they had either like a master's or doctorate level degree. And they all kind of changed their program similarly years ago. That said, I hate to say, and I will say that I have very much seen the ugly side of corporate healthcare in the last year or so. I have worked for kind of major healthcare organizations for ever since I graduated, which is about 5 years ago. And I really don't think I realized how ugly it was until the pandemic hit. And then I just saw the ugly head of corporate greed, and how it impacted staffing, how it impacted, what we were able to do for our patients. And it's just, it turned me off to corporate healthcare, to be perfectly honest. I left my corporate job. I now work for the VA, which is totally different. And I love it there. And it's, and obviously I work for myself too, but I'm just very disheartened because we can't get healthcare organizations to pay nurses well enough to keep them in a pandemic, forcing them to, require mandated overtime for people who already work like 50 hours a week.
Crazy.
Require, they're, when they do bring in travel nurses, they're paying them double. And it's just like, so you can't afford it. You can obviously afford to pay a nurse that it would serve your organization better to bring in a nurse, train them. Yes, you have to pay them benefits. Yes, maybe you have to pay them more ultimately than the travel nurse, but they're going to stay, and you're not going to have these constant problems and like, hemorrhaging resources trying to solve them. Doctors and stuff like that, same way. I mean, like doctors are fed up with the pandemic. Just about everybody is. So, if you had asked me that question 3 years ago, I probably would have been, I think like that's a good step in the right direction. Now I'm just like, no, these companies are greedy and they're going to do anything they can to underpay you. And unfortunately, the city we live in, all of the hospitals are in cahoots. So they all know exactly how much each other pays and kind of use that as a way to keep their wages down. So you go into anywhere and ask for, be like, no, I want, $25 an hour. They're like, well, you're not going to get that anywhere else. Why would we give it to you? Either take the job at the pay rate that we offer or don't take it. Which is infuriating. So
on all the time effort. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I hope so. I mean, I really do, because like, we make on average about $40,000 a year, whereas starting salary for a PA, which, arguably is a higher level of care, but they still like, they make easily $80,000, like walking out the door. So it shouldn't be double. There should be, and honestly, PA should probably make more than they do too. So it's, it's even doctors really. I mean, like, doctors don't start out making the money that people think they do, considering they have, probably $100,000 worth of undergrad debt, easily another $100,000 worth of med school debt, plus like, internship stuff that they are paid for technically, but they're, not really paid well.
Yeah.
So it's like, by the time you're like really a doctor and able to practice, you're making maybe $60,000-$70,000 a year to start. Like, that's really not a lot when you're
not a lot.
looking at like,
education and just, oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I think that's something that often, it's unrelated to being a dietitian, but I hear that from people a lot, because I have a lot of friends that are doctors, and it's just kind of like, everybody's like, oh, you're a doctor for the money. And it's just like, first of all, the hospital makes the money, not the doctor. And second of all, like, they have I have friends who have loan payments that are more than my mortgage.
Oh my goodness.
And my mortgage is $1,000 a month. So it's like,
recently, just working in the hospital setting and getting to know some of the residents and just learning about like, they're getting paid, but like, it's nothing.
Like you can barely get by. Like it's, and meanwhile, like usually you defer your loans. So like your loan payments are on hold, but they're still accruing interest. So it's like you're, if you can pay it, you still should. And it's a mess. So like being a doctor really is not guaranteed money at all.
You can't go into it looking to make a lot of money, right? That's just, you genuinely have an interest in and want to be doing with your life, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, the hospital's the one making the money, not the doctor. So, I don't know how we went down that rabbit hole, but don't become a dietitian for the money. Don't become a dietitian because you want people to listen to you, because they won't. If you like hard work and like zero gratification,
this is the path.
This is your place. Which, now I'm looking at kind of my little list of questions. Let's talk about an even more fun topic. Let's talk about diversity in the dietetics field. So for those of you who are listening, Brittney is a woman of color, and women of color are very much underrepresented in the field of dietetics. really just, honestly in healthcare across the board, but I feel like it's especially bad in dietetics. So I am just so curious to hear, especially as a non-traditional student, kind of how did this like non-representation basically of people of color in the field of dietetics, how did that impact your experience? And how do you think we can help to kind of bring more people of color into the field of dietetics?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's like a lack of awareness about the career path in general. I think, I don't know, I didn't hear anything about dietitians until when I was in college the first time. Of course, I heard about it because I decided to go with human nutrition. But previously to choosing human nutrition, I didn't know anything about dietetics in the field of the dietitian. So I think awareness is one big part of it. And truthfully, and I don't know if it's because I grew up in Kentucky, it probably is, but I am very, very much so used to being one of a small handful of people, a person of color in a room in any given situation, whether it's work, school. That's just pretty much normal for me. So I think I realized that it was underrepresented. But like when I walked into the classroom and realized I was one of maybe 3 Black people, I was like, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't surprised by any means. But I think it definitely is something that we need to be striving to improve because, we all know that there are major disparities in healthcare. And I think a part of that is because there are whole groups of people that are not represented in the providers. And just my experience with my internship, none of my preceptors were African American or even anything other than white. I did have one, which is kind of unusual because again, men are not very super
for sure. Yeah, in dietetics.
But I think it's definitely something we could be working on and encouraging other minorities. And maybe this is how we promote the field, the groups that we're speaking to about it, getting involved with organizations locally to talk about the profession and getting people interested in it. And I think also another barrier really was going back to the structure and having to do this paid internship. I think that counts a lot of people out. And historically, minorities don't have lots of generational wealth or parents paying for their education. So you're doing this out of pocket. And a lot of times, my parents were not able to help me with school at all. I know they supported me mentally and stuff like that, but like I had to take out student loans and I had to get scholarships. And fortunately, my grades were great and I was able to get a lot of assistance that way. But that's not an option for everybody. So it's really difficult when you're looking at the financial aspect as well and just not having that financial support from family members. And I know it's so interesting because I went to several open houses for internships and they were talking about how to fund your internship. In many of the programs, their first option was asking family and friends. And I'm like, okay, next, because that's not enough. I think that's the case for a lot of people, especially a lot of people of color. Like asking family and friends is not an option. My parents didn't have $10,000 laying around to pay for my internship. And I think that's a problem, a barrier that many, many people, not just people of color, but especially people of color have in getting into this field for sure.
Yeah. No, I think you hit on so many things. I think, it's almost like there's kind of like, there's a socioeconomic divide, which like we all know does kind of walk the color line as well, but it does, it's not just people of color, obviously, but
absolutely.
But it impacts them significantly more than it affects us white folk, because you're right, like it's that generational wealth. Like you don't realize that like having even a century of your family members being able to go to college, buy houses in certain areas, afford get loans to buy cars and things like that, buy houses, etc. They've been able to accumulate things that like other people have been intentionally excluded from until very, very recently. And it's really kind of the generation of like maybe our parents. I think we're about the same age. So like probably our parents. And so they're kind of really that first generation that a lot of white people had, that first generation a century ago. And that's kind of like, and it makes a big difference in terms of what you now here today are able to do. And student loans are great, but they're stressful, right? Like, I paid for a lot. I didn't pay for all of my education. I will say that my parents did help some, but like it's a lot. Like it's a lot. And like, especially if you haven't seen people in your family do it, who kind of have that experience, even if they're not paying for it, they're kind of like, you can do this. This is what college is like. it's a normal thing to do. It's okay to be stressed out about the money. If you don't have
Yeah,
that person to look to in your family or like your immediate, close friends, or just kind of, you're not in an environment where that is common or talked about, it's kind of, it's discouraging.
absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. And I also think that when you're um, a traditional college student going right out of high school and you're taking out student loans, I don't think you truly realize the impact of that. I mean, for
no.
me, I was excited to take out student loans, and people kept talking about this thing called a residual. And I
Yeah,
was like, oh, I cannot wait to get my residual. I'm thinking, this is just free money. It's not.
no, it's not. It
You
comes with
don't
interest.
understand fully when you're like high school going into college. You're just thinking, oh, I'm about to get this check. Awesome. It's not. It's not this. No, it's not free.
They
You're gonna
ask
pay
you for that back.
that back. Absolutely.
with interest.
Yeah.
And like it's not the like, because I think you're so right, because I remember like going into college and I'm just like, oh, like when I graduate I'll get a job and blah blah blah. And like honestly, like a generation before us, like Generation X, I feel like that's honestly the experience that they had, and it
Yeah.
was a lot easier. But the minimum wage hasn't increased in, I forget how many decades at this point,
Yeah.
but decades, and inflation obviously has continued to go up.
Yeah.
Our salaries really haven't increased much compared to inflation, especially now. But I mean,
Yeah.
even, before this most recent surge, it's like, it really, as a very low income field, I won't say very low income field, that's not fair, but as a like lower paying field per the educational cost, um it's strenuous. It's not just like, oh, I'm paying back, like a car payment is less stressful.
Yeah.
In some cases, like I said, I have friends from med school that like their mortgage is less stressful than their
I can't even fathom that. That is insane.
yeah. Yeah, it's wild. It's wild. Yeah, and I think, the idea too of like, it's so interesting that you said that, you had no idea what a dietitian was. And like, I honestly didn't either. I knew of a lot of like other healthcare professions like nursing and things like that, but I didn't know like what a dietitian was, or how, and like I'm like the target, demographic of like, what dietitians are, right? So it's just kind of like, clearly we're doing something wrong in
Yeah.
terms of how we're, because not even, not that we want, like all the white girls or whatever, but like, if we're not able to like market to anybody at this point,
Yeah.
really. And it's just like, especially when you're talking to people about food, food is very cultural, food is very like soulful, food is like, the patient population that you have is not always going to reflect your own identity. And I
Yeah.
think the more providers we can have in the field to shape, one, how we practice, the research that we do, and just offer themselves as a face for somebody to talk to, because somebody who has a background or experience is very different from mine may not feel comfortable talking to me. That's
Absolutely. Yeah.
okay. But I right now it's kind of, I'm in a position where I'm like, I don't know who else to send you to, because everybody else is basically like me.
Yeah.
um
And I
and
also
like,
think a lot of times people hear that their cultural foods are not healthy and that they need
mhm,
to switch to maybe a Mediterranean diet or something like that. And the reality is, the foods that are in your culture can be just as healthy as the
yes,
next. It's literally all about how you're preparing them and maybe
mhm,
making little adjustments to
yeah,
make sure everything is as healthy as it can be. But honestly, like the foods that you typically eat in your culture, you should continue eating those. And I think
yes,
sometimes when you're working with somebody who may not understand your culture and may not be familiar with the foods in your culture,
mhm,
their first thought is, well, let me switch you over to this, right?
mhm,
Well, instead of what you're eating now, we'll switch over and eat all of these foods here. And that could be eliminating huge portions of what people
yeah,
typically eat, which I think is discouraging. Like if I went to a doctor and they said, okay, collard greens, they're out, I'd be
yeah.
like, okay,
You're
next.
like, and like they kind of, you can almost like see it, like they kind of just like shut down right then.
Yeah,
So it's like, I'm not gonna do that, or this is ruining my life. Right. And
no one's
yeah, and
lying. throw away the stuff they've been eating for years
Yeah.
and switch to something. And nobody wants to do that. And I think you immediately lose people. And that's again where we're seeing those disparities in healthcare, because now, this counseling technique that you're using for, all of your patients across the board isn't working for a portion of your patients. Like, that's not working. They're not willing to make that change. And reality is they don't have to.
Right.
On us as dietitians to be culturally competent. I know that's something we
Yes.
talk a lot, but I think, if you don't have the experience, it's hard to be culturally competent. Like, if you don't know any different, how can you be?
Well, and I think that's just it. Like, even, looking to, who are the educators in dietetics, who are the movers and shakers at the academy level, who's doing the research, who is like trickling down this cultural competence, right, that we're all supposed to have. If they're not people who kind of organically have it themselves, then like, how the heck are you supposed to teach it to me?
Yeah,
Right. And it's
absolutely.
just, yeah. And like, to an extent, there's only like so culturally competent I'm ever going to be as a white woman, because like I don't know what it's like to be Black. I don't know what it's like to be Hispanic. I don't know, I know bits and pieces of those food culture because I love food, but like I don't know the core experience. And at the end of the day, that may be the barrier that they would just prefer to talk to a different provider. And that's okay. They should have that option.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you're here and coming into the field of dietetics, and for no other reason to serve our clients. But yeah, it's rough. So how do you think we fix that? You think marketing to different organizations and anything specific that you can think of that would be?
I definitely just think being intentional, being very intentional about the groups that we are targeting, the populations we're targeting, the communities we're getting out in. I think that has to be front of mind when we're out there promoting the field, for sure.
Yeah, I would agree that. So this has been awesome. I feel like we took a pretty deep dive pretty fast. So
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So to wrap up, and I kind of, anytime I have a guest on, this is what I ask. So if you had one piece of advice for somebody either considering a field in dietetics or like just graduating, or even just like college students, like considering a career path in healthcare, what would be your one piece of advice?
I think get out there and shadow. If you have the opportunity to do it, I think actually see what it's about. I know in the dietetics, when you're getting a degree, at least at the university we went to, there's a class where you have to get out and shadow, but you don't do that until the end of your 4 years, basically, unless you're one of your last classes that you take. So fortunately, when I shadowed, I still loved it and was still very interested in it and wanted to do it. But I think having that opportunity on the front end when you're kind of still thinking through what are your options, what do you want to do, getting out there like, I think I'm interested in X, Y, and Z, and reaching out to people in that field and saying, can I come and sit with you? Can I observe? Can I just see it in action? And then that'll just help you make sure you're solidifying, like, this is actually what I'm doing. Because I mean, there's nothing worse than getting a degree and then realizing that's not going to work and having to go back to the drawing board. I've done it. And, it's better to make that decision the first time. So definitely go out there, see what it's actually about before you fully commit.
I love that, because I think so many like different fields in healthcare, you kind of start with the same basic core courses, right? Like you have like your biology and your chemistry and physics and like things like that like you have to take. So shadowing while you're those, you're going to have to take those regardless, but you can switch after that, right? But kind of shadowing almost at that point before you kind of get into more like nuanced, like nutrition, PT, exercise science, medical, whatever it is that you're wanting to do, kind of shadowing some before that. I love that. I think it also helps you kind of keep your end goal in mind too. That's like,
I know a lot, like with dietetics specifically, there are a lot of pathways you can take once you have this education and this the certificate. So I mean, I think it would be kind of good. And I know as an intern, you do get those experiences, but typically as a student, you don't get that until the very, very end. So I think just stuff, keeping an eye on like, okay, maybe I thought I wanted to do clinical, but then I shadowed a clinician and I thought, oh my gosh, that's really boring. Maybe instead I want to do food service management or something like that. Like it just kind of helps you further solidify the pathway you want to take. And I can kind of tailor your experiences that way as well. Maybe you could put more emphasis on volunteering here versus there or whatever else. And it just kind of helps you kind of have a better idea of where you're going.
Yeah. No, I love that. And just also too, as a preceptor and as a provider, I mean, I know most of us in the field, like we've been in your shoes, right? Like we've been a student, not knowing what we want to do. You know, we're here to help you. Like, and you know, even if it's like, you know, a provider who may turn down this, that, and the other, like most people will do just about anything for students. And really at the end of the day, all you're asking to do is kind of just tag along. So like you're really asking for like a whole lot. But honestly, I mean, most of us, like, you know, it's not just like we're willing to like tolerate you, like we're excited to have you, because like that's probably one of my favorite parts about being a dietitian is, you know, getting to turn around and then like train other dietitians. Or even just, you know, like have students shadows, speak to students, things like that, because, you know, like that's the future of your field coming
Yeah.
in. So I don't ever feel like you're burdening anyone, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Is if you're
Yeah.
asking
We
for,
appreciate it. We definitely.
if you're asking for shadowing or preceptorship or anything like that, like and you know, I feel like I'm kind of a pretty warm and fuzzy person to approach, but not everybody is. But even the cold, prickly ones get excited about students. So. I promise. Well, Brittney, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much, not just for your time, your energy, your thoughtfulness, and truly just being willing to kind of dive right in and do this
Yeah.
kind of at the end of your this is the end of our first week, right? Like we've
Yeah.
only been together for a week, so we are moving and shaking around here. We will sign off until next week, folks, but I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Remember to nourish.